There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be surrounded by people who genuinely like you, sitting in a room full of easy laughter and warmth, and still feel the glass. Not between you and one person, but between you and something, some quality of presence that everyone else in the room seems to inhabit effortlessly while you remain just outside it, watching, wondering what they know that you don't, wondering what you are missing that they were simply handed. Most people who feel this assume the explanation is personal. They are too intense, too quiet, too much of something or not enough of something else. They spend years adjusting, softening their edges, practicing the performance of ease, studying the social choreography of people who seem to belong with no effort at all, and still the glass remains. Sometimes it seems to thin. Sometimes, in the right moment, you can almost forget it is there. But it never fully disappears. And the more honest you are with yourself, the more you begin to suspect that the adjustments were never going to work. Because the problem was never about who you are. It was always about what you see. What most people experience as a social environment, you experience as a text with a subtext running beneath it. Every room has an architecture that most of its occupants never consciously notice, who the actual center of gravity is versus who speaks the most, whose approval quietly determines the temperature of every conversation, which laughter is genuine and which is performed to maintain position, which friendships are real and which are maintained out of an unspoken mutual necessity. You read these things not because you choose to, but because they appear to you the way furniture appears, simply present, impossible to ignore once seen. Other people walk into a room and feel the atmosphere. You walk in and find yourself, almost against your will, mapping the diagram of it. This is not cynicism. Cynicism is a decision, a posture chosen in response to disappointment. What you experience is closer to the opposite, not a lens you put on, but a quality of perception that operates before interpretation, before opinion, before any choice about how to see. The performance beneath the warmth presents itself automatically. The laugh that is obligatory rather than spontaneous. The question asked not out of curiosity but out of the social requirement to appear interested. The affection that carries a slight strategic edge. These are not things you go looking for. They arrive the way a slightly flat note arrives to someone with perfect pitch, not through effort, but through an involuntary recognition that something is not quite settled in what is being presented. And here is the consequence that no social advice ever addresses. You cannot participate in a performance while simultaneously watching it. The moment you become aware of the theater, even if you love the theater, even if you are genuinely moved by it, some part of you is always backstage. You can go through the motions with real feeling. You can deliver your lines from a place of authentic emotion. But there is a part of you that watches yourself doing it, and that witness, that inescapable internal observer, creates a distance between you and full immersion that no amount of effort or goodwill can fully collapse. Genuine belonging, in the way most people seem to experience it, appears to require a form of forgetting. A willingness, conscious or not, to stop reading and simply be. And the tragedy is not that you were ever excluded. The tragedy is that you became too honest to pretend your way in even when the door was open. What makes this particular loneliness so difficult to name, and so impervious to the usual consolations, is that the people around you appear to belong without noticing that they do. Their ease looks effortless because, for them, it largely is. They are not suppressing the observations you are making. They simply are not making them. They are inside the experience rather than watching it. And this creates a secondary wound that cuts deeper than the first, the suspicion that everyone else is living inside a quality of connection that you are constitutionally incapable of reaching. That the warmth you observe is real for them in a way it cannot be real for you. That you are watching a film about belonging from outside a window, close enough to hear the soundtrack, too far to feel the warmth. But this is precisely where the understanding must go deeper, because stopping here gets the truth half right and leaves the more important half entirely in the dark. The perception you carry, this involuntary reading of social architecture, this compulsive mapping of what lies beneath the surface of human interaction, was not always there. It was not something you were simply born with, a quirk of temperament that arrived fully formed. It was trained into you by environments that made reading the room a matter of genuine consequence. The child who grows up in a household where moods shift without warning and warmth is conditional develops a capacity for emotional reading that most children never need to cultivate. The adolescent who is excluded from the groups that seem to govern everything in those years learns to study social dynamics not as an intellectual curiosity but as a form of survival. The person who was made to feel like the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of room, that person builds an instrument of social perception so precise and so practiced that it cannot be put down when the threat has passed. It becomes part of the architecture of the self. The wound became the lens. And the lens kept working long after the wound had nominally healed. This is the realization that changes the shape of everything that came before it. You did not develop this perception despite your experience of exclusion. You developed it because of it. The same early experiences that first placed you outside the circle also gave you the exact instrument that makes fully returning to it feel structurally impossible now. The observer was created by the observation. Something excluded you, and in response your mind became so sophisticated in its reading of why, so precise in its mapping of the social territory, that the uncalculated, unmonitored presence that belonging requires became genuinely difficult to sustain. The very map you drew to find your way home made it nearly impossible to stop navigating long enough to arrive. And this means something more uncomfortable than simply noting that pain can shape a person. The longing and the obstacle are made of the same material. The reason you crave belonging so intensely and the reason it remains at a slight remove are not two separate problems. They are the same mechanism, moving in opposite directions simultaneously. The clearest map of belonging tends to belong to the person who is most lost within it. This is not a resolution. It does not make the glass disappear. But it does something that every easy reassurance fails to accomplish. It replaces the explanation of deficiency with the explanation of consequence. It says not that something is wrong with you, but that something happened to you, and your mind responded with extraordinary precision, and that response became permanent, and what you live with now is both the gift and the cost of that precision, inseparable from each other, impossible to fully divide. Because there is a gift, even if it arrives uninvited and carries an invoice that seems impossible to justify. The person who cannot stop reading the room is also the person who sees what most people inside the room never notice. You see the person who laughs at twice the necessary volume and recognize, without being told, without even pausing to analyze it, that the volume is covering something that silence would expose. You see the loneliness inside the belonging, the person who appears most anchored to the group, most fluent in the performance of ease, most at home in every social texture, and you notice the private distance that lives inside them like a room no one else has been invited into. You see the invisible hierarchies that everyone inside the group is unconsciously adjusting their behavior around while believing they are simply being themselves. You are, in some irreducible sense, a witness to the actual human experience unfolding beneath the surface of its social presentation. That is not a small thing. Most people never see it at all. And the strangest truth about this vantage point, the one that almost no one who has occupied it has ever been clearly offered, is that the exile's view of the village is often more complete than the villagers'. The person who has stood just outside the warmth of many fires, without fully belonging to any of them, has seen more of what fire actually is than someone who found one fire early and stayed. The permanence of the outsider position is also the permanence of the wider angle. What was never given gently is sometimes exactly what gives you the furthest sight. But it would be dishonest to dress this in false comfort. The knowledge does not end the ache. The person who finally understands why they have never fully belonged does not immediately stop wanting to. The longing does not transform into peace simply because it has been named clearly. What changes is subtler than that, the way you hold the ache, the meaning you assign to it, whether it speaks to you as evidence of your inadequacy or as the signature of your specific history. Whether it is the voice of something broken or the sound of something that happened and left its particular and permanent mark, there is a profound difference between being broken and being formed by something that was not easy. Broken implies a failure against a standard, a version of you that should have functioned a certain way and didn't. Formed implies a specific configuration with specific costs and specific capacities that cannot be untangled from each other without losing what makes the person who they are. The person who sees too clearly to belong without reservation is not a damaged version of someone who belongs effortlessly. They are a different arrangement of the same human material, carrying a different texture of experience, operating with a different quality of interiority, paying a price that was set before they knew they were agreeing to it. What most people who have spent their lives feeling this way have never been given, not from family, not from friendship, not from any ordinary framing of what social struggle means, is the plain acknowledgement that their experience had a logic to it. Not that the pain was secretly necessary. Not that the isolation was a hidden blessing. Just that it made sense. That the pattern was coherent. That they were not randomly deficient or cosmically unlucky. That there was a reason the glass existed, and the reason lived in both what happened to them and what they became in response to it, and that these two things were never fully separable from the beginning. Because even now, knowing all of this, you will walk into the next room and the reading will begin again before you decide it should. The subtext will present itself. The architecture will arrange itself in front of you. The witness will wake without being called. Not as a choice. Not as a defense mechanism you can consciously lower with enough therapy or enough self-awareness. But as the specific shape your attention took in response to the specific shape of what formed you. The witness does not sleep because it was never designed to sleep, it was built to stay awake, and the purpose it was built for made staying awake matter. But that witness is also the one who has never successfully deceived you for very long. In all the rooms you have stood slightly outside of, in all the groups you have half entered and half watched, the one person you could never convince with a convincing performance was yourself. There is something worth sitting within that, a form of integrity that was handed to you without being asked but that you carry nonetheless. You know when your connections are genuine. You know when you are choosing freely and when you are performing your choosing. You see yourself with the same quality of attention with which you see everything else. The perception that made belonging difficult also made certain kinds of self-deception genuinely hard to sustain. That is not a clean comfort. But it is a real one. You were never missing something that was freely given to everyone else and somehow bypassed you. You were paying a price for something you did not choose and could not have returned even if you had wanted to, a specific quality of consciousness, shaped by a specific history, that sees the world with a particular and irreversible clarity. The glass was never a wall you failed to climb. It was the precise distance that comes with the view. If something in this conversation reached a part of your experience that rarely gets reached, if this kind of honest, searching exploration of what it actually means to be human speaks to something in you, then stay close to this space. Subscribe, because the most important questions about the inner life are the ones least often spoken plainly, and there is always more to understand.